They wrote the history. We deliver the verdict. This is Unwritten Verdict.
They will tell you it was a shootout, a tragedy, a mistake. They will use words like confrontation and raid. They will lie. We are here for the truth. The truth is, on December 4th, 1969, the United States government executed a 21-year-old man in his sleep. His name was Fred Hampton, and his only crime was being the future. To understand why the state murdered Fred Hampton, you must first understand the man they feared. He was not born a revolutionary. He was made one by the very system that would later kill him. Born in Chicago in 1948, Frederick Allen Hampton grew up in the shadow of American terror. His family knew the family of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old boy lynched in Mississippi in 1955. Hampton's mother, Iberia, had babysat young Emmett. This was not a distant headline. It was a personal connection to the raw, violent heart of white supremacy. That brutality shaped his consciousness. From his earliest days, Hampton was a leader, not a follower, not a bystander, a leader. In high school, he was a gifted student and athlete, but his true talent was organizing people for justice. He organized the student chapter of the NAACP and led protests against his school for only nominating white girls for homecoming queen, forcing them to include black candidates. While others were focused on prom, Fred Hampton was focused on power. He led the West Suburban NAACP Youth Council and through his dynamic leadership grew its membership from a handful to a force of 500 young people. His demands were not radical. They were for basic human dignity. In 1967, he led rallies to demand a racially integrated public swimming pool in his hometown of Maywood, Illinois. The nearest pool for black children was miles away, while a whites-only pool stood just 2 miles from their homes. For demanding a place for black children to swim, the state responded with the only language it truly speaks to black resistance: violence. Police clashed with protesters, and Hampton, along with 17 others, was arrested and charged with mob action. This was the turning point. Hampton was studying pre-law at Triton Junior College, not to become a wealthy lawyer, but to learn the system's rules to defend his people from police brutality. But after repeated violent encounters with police during peaceful demonstrations, he saw the truth. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. You could not politely ask it for justice. You could not reform a structure built on oppression. He came to understand what he would later preach. Revolution is nothing but like having a sore on your body and then you put something on that sore to cure that infection. I'm telling you that we're living in an infectious society right now. His move from the by-the-book NAACP to the Black Panther Party was not a choice for extremism. It was a logical conclusion, forced upon him by a state that met every request for peace with a declaration of war. In November 1968, Fred Hampton joined the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party, and a fire became an inferno. He wasn't just a member, he was a force of nature. His skill as an orator, honed by studying the cadences of church ministers and the speeches of Malcolm X and Dr. King, was electrifying. He quickly became the deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter, a leader at just 20 years old. But his power was not just in his words, it was in his ideology, a clear and potent threat to the American order. Hampton was a revolutionary socialist. He didn't just want a piece of the pie, he wanted to dismantle the entire corrupt bakery. He articulated a vision that went far beyond civil rights and integration. This was not just theory. The Black Panther Party put socialism into practice through its survival programs. These were not charity, they were acts of political warfare. The Free Breakfast for Children program fed thousands of hungry kids every morning, building trust and demonstrating that the Panthers could provide for the community in ways the state would not. They established free medical clinics, provided legal aid, and patrolled neighborhoods to monitor police brutality. Hampton explained the strategy. First you have free breakfasts, then you have free medical care, then you have free bus rides, and soon you have freedom. These programs were a direct threat to the legitimacy of the US government. They exposed the state's failure to care for its citizens and offered a powerful, working alternative. This is why the FBI, in its own secret documents, issued directives to destroy the Panthers' Breakfast for Children program. The state wasn't afraid of the Panthers' guns. It was afraid of their groceries. It was afraid of their clinics. It was afraid of an organization that was winning the love and loyalty of the people by serving their needs. The war against the Black Panther Party was not a war on crime. It was a war against a competing and more effective model of social organization. He declared, "We're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism." He saw racism not as a personal failing of some bad white people, but as a structural tool of the wealthy. Racism is an excuse used for capitalism, he taught, and we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. This analysis was dangerous because it was correct. It threatened to unite people based on their shared economic oppression, rather than keeping them divided by skin color. He called for an international proletarian revolution, aligning the struggle of black people in America with the struggles of the oppressed all over the world. What made Fred Hampton a mortal threat to the United States government was not just his ideology or his programs, it was his genius for unity. In the most segregated city in America, he achieved the impossible. He built the Rainbow Coalition. This was not the symbolic electoral coalition that would come later. This was a revolutionary alliance of the dispossessed built on a foundation of class struggle. Hampton understood that the system maintained control by keeping the poor at each other's throats. He said, "We're gonna fight racism not with racism, but with solidarity." And he put those words into action. He brought together the Black Panthers with the Young Lords, a revolutionary Puerto Rican organization fighting gentrification and police violence in their communities. He brought them together with the Young Patriots, a group of poor white migrants from Appalachia who were derided as hillbillies and also suffered from poverty and police brutality. He even negotiated peace pacts between Chicago's most powerful street gangs, convincing them that their true enemy was not each other, but the system that kept them all in the ghetto. Imagine the scene in 1969 Chicago. Black Panthers wearing their leather jackets and berets, standing shoulder to shoulder with young white Southerners, some of whom wore Confederate flag patches on their clothes, and Puerto Rican nationalists. They weren't just talking. They were organizing together, marching together, and running community programs together. They found common ground on the issues that plagued all their communities: substandard housing, police terror, and a capitalist system that profited from their poverty. This was the American establishment's worst nightmare made real. The entire structure of white supremacy and capitalism in America depends on racial division to prevent the working class from realizing its collective power. By uniting poor blacks, browns, and whites under a single anti-capitalist, anti-racist banner, Fred Hampton was dismantling the primary mechanism of social control. He was proving that a multiracial, class-conscious revolution was not just a theory, it was a reality. This is why the state had to kill him. The FBI's own documents revealed that a primary goal of its counterintelligence programs was to prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups because, as they wrote, "In unity there is strength." Fred Hampton was building that unity, and it was spreading. They didn't just assassinate a man, they assassinated the rainbow. They murdered the example of unity before it could ignite a fire across the nation. The assassination of Fred Hampton was not a rogue police operation. It was the result of a secret, illegal, and systematic war waged by the federal government against its own citizens. The name of that war was COINTELPRO. The tactics of COINTELPRO were a blueprint for state-sponsored terror. They included psychological warfare, planting false stories in the media, forging letters to create conflict between leaders, illegal break-ins, wrongful imprisonment on fabricated charges, and, as the final solution, assassination. To understand the murder of Fred Hampton, you must read the government's own death warrant. A secret FBI memo from March 1968, which laid out the goals of the program against black movements, is the Rosetta Stone. It reveals the state's deepest fear. The memo called for agents to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. The memo named past and potential messiahs: Malcolm X, already assassinated; Martin Luther King Jr., who would be assassinated just 1 month after this memo was written; Stokely Carmichael; Elijah Muhammad. The FBI was actively hunting for the next charismatic leader who could unite the masses. And in Chicago, they found him. With his powerful oratory, his deep commitment to socialist principles, and his unprecedented success in building the Rainbow Coalition, Fred Hampton was the living embodiment of the Black Messiah the state was sworn to destroy. When the FBI identified him as a threat, they weren't just opening a file. They were marking him for elimination according to their own secret standing order. COINTELPRO, short for counterintelligence program, was the FBI's weapon to crush dissent. From 1956 to 1971, it operated in the shadows with a single mandate: expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any organization that challenged the American status quo. Its targets included the anti-war movement, the American Indian movement, Puerto Rican independence groups, and every major civil rights organization. But its most intense fury was reserved for the Black Panther Party. Of the 295 documented COINTELPRO actions against black liberation groups, 233 were aimed squarely at the Panthers. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called them the greatest threat to the internal security of the country and viewed them as an enemy of the state to be destroyed. Every state conspiracy needs a tool. For the assassination of Fred Hampton, the FBI's tool was a 19-year-old car thief named William O'Neill. His story is not a tragedy of a conflicted man caught between two worlds. It is the story of how the state manufactures betrayal and weaponizes weakness. In 1968, O'Neill was arrested for stealing a car and driving it across state lines, a federal offense. FBI Special Agent Roy Mitchell, an agent praised within the Bureau for his skill in development of informants in the racial field, saw an opportunity. He offered O'Neill a deal. The felony charges would disappear, and he would receive a monthly stipend. In return, he would become a paid agent of the state and infiltrate the Black Panther Party. The plot to assassinate Fred Hampton could not have succeeded without O'Neill. His most crucial contribution was the detailed floor plan of Hampton's apartment on West Monroe Street. He drew a map for the killers, marking the furniture, the rooms, and exactly where Fred Hampton slept. It was a blueprint for a murder. On the night of December 3, 1969, O'Neill played his final role. He prepared a late dinner for Hampton and other Panthers at the apartment. Into Hampton's drink, he slipped a massive dose of secobarbital, a powerful barbiturate, to ensure the chairman would be deeply unconscious and unable to react during the raid. Then he went home and collected his pay. For his services in the operation that left 2 men dead, the Federal Bureau of Investigation paid William O'Neill a $300 bonus. It was blood money. It was a receipt for a contract killing, signed and delivered by the United States government. O'Neill was not just a passive spy, he was an agent provocateur, a weapon aimed at the heart of the movement. Following the directives of his FBI handler, he quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the Panthers' chief of security. From this position of ultimate trust, he had access to everything: membership lists, meeting schedules, weapons caches, and the private lives of the leadership. He constantly pushed for more militant actions, urged the party to buy more guns, and deliberately sowed seeds of paranoia, all while feeding intelligence back to his masters at the FBI. Newly obtained files show he was instrumental in sabotaging potential alliances, like one with the Vice Lord's gang, by specifically warning Hampton to be wary of informants, the very role he was playing. At 4:30 a.m. on December 4, 1969, the state came to collect its debt. The details of what happened in that apartment are not in dispute. They are a matter of forensic fact and eyewitness testimony. This was not a raid, it was an execution. 14 Chicago police officers, working under the direction of Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan, stormed the apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street. They were armed for war, carrying pistols, shotguns, and a Thompson submachine gun. Their attack was guided by the floor plan provided by William O'Neill. In the back bedroom, Fred Hampton lay unconscious, drugged by O'Neill's poison. Beside him was his fiancée, Deborah Johnson, who was 8.5 months pregnant with their child, Fred Hampton Jr. She threw her body over his, trying to shield him from the bullets ripping through the mattress. After the initial onslaught, the shooting paused. Hampton was wounded, but still alive. Police officers entered the bedroom and dragged the pregnant Deborah Johnson out. What she heard next is the unwritten verdict, the eyewitness testimony to a state-sponsored murder. She heard one officer ask, "Is he still alive?" Then 2 more gunshots rang out from inside the bedroom. A second officer's voice followed, "He's good and dead now." Forensic evidence would later confirm the truth. Fred Hampton was executed. 2 bullets, fired at point-blank range, were put into his head as he lay helpless in his bed. The state had neutralized its target. The first to die was Mark Clark, a 22-year-old Panther leader from Peoria. He was on security duty in the living room, a shotgun in his lap. The police kicked in the door and shot him instantly. A single bullet tore through his heart, killing him before he could react. As he fell, a reflexive death convulsion caused his finger to pull the trigger of his shotgun, firing 1 round into the ceiling. Ballistics and forensic analysis later proved this was the only shot fired by a Black Panther during the entire assault. The police claim of a shootout was a lie from the first second. What followed was a shoot-in. The officers unleashed a furious barrage of gunfire, spraying more than 90 bullets into the small apartment. The plaster walls were shredded, the bullets tearing through to where the Panthers were sleeping. The physical evidence left no doubt. The gunfire was almost entirely one-directional, fired by the police into the apartment. An assassination is a 2-part crime. First, the physical act of murder. Second, the official story to justify it. The cover-up of Fred Hampton's murder began before his body was cold, and it was as systematic as the raid itself. Hours after the execution, State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan stood before the media and painted a picture of a heroic police force under fire. He claimed his officers were met with a vicious and violent barrage from the Panthers, forcing them into a prolonged gun battle. The Chicago press, with few exceptions, dutifully printed the official lie. But the conspirators made a crucial mistake. They failed to seal the crime scene. In a brilliant act of political jujitsu, the Black Panther Party turned the apartment into a museum of state terror. They opened the doors and invited the world to see the truth. Thousands of Chicagoans, black and white, citizens, reporters, even clergy, toured the bullet-riddled rooms and saw the blood-soaked mattress where Hampton died. They saw with their own eyes that this was no shootout. This was a massacre. The official story crumbled under the weight of the physical evidence. The fight for truth then moved to the courts. The survivors and the families of Hampton and Clark, represented by the courageous attorneys of the People's Law Office, filed a civil rights lawsuit, Hampton versus Hanrahan. For 13 years, they battled a government determined to hide its crimes. Through the lawsuit, they painstakingly uncovered the secret COINTELPRO documents, the role of the informant William O'Neill, and the web of conspiracy linking the FBI to the Chicago police. In 1982, the government finally surrendered. Facing a mountain of evidence, the city of Chicago, Cook County, and the federal government agreed to a settlement of $1.85 million, the largest of its kind at the time. The government's lawyers insisted it was not an admission of guilt, but G. Flint Taylor, one of the people's lawyers, stated the plain truth. The settlement is an admission of the conspiracy that existed between the FBI and Hanrahan's men to murder Fred Hampton. The state paid to keep its secrets buried, but the truth was already out. To bolster the narrative, Hanrahan's office engaged in blatant evidence fabrication. They provided the Chicago Tribune with exclusive photos of a door from the apartment, with marks circled and labeled as bullet holes from Panther weapons. Later investigation by the Panthers' lawyers revealed the bullet holes were nail heads. They falsified ballistics reports, and in a final act of grotesque injustice, they arrested the 7 raid survivors, the very people who had been shot at, beaten, and had watched their comrades die, and charged them with attempted murder. These are not the actions of law enforcement. These are the tactics of a conspiracy. The assassination of Fred Hampton was not just an American tragedy. It was a battle in a global war. The Black Panther Party saw itself as part of an international front against U.S. imperialism, in solidarity with liberation movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The U.S. government, in turn, saw the Panthers as a domestic front of that same war. Crushing Black revolutionary consciousness at home was essential for maintaining an empire abroad. COINTELPRO was officially terminated in 1971 after activists broke into an FBI office and exposed its existence to the world. But a program does not die. Its tactics are simply absorbed into the state's permanent arsenal. The ghost of COINTELPRO haunts us today. The war on Black liberation never ended. It just evolved. The assassination of Fred Hampton was a strategic decapitation. It was meant to terrorize, to show an entire generation of activists the ultimate price of effective, unifying leadership. It created a void in Black revolutionary thought and action that is still felt today. The modern surveillance state is the next phase of that strategy. It is designed to prevent another Fred Hampton from ever rising in the first place. It aims to atomize movements before they can coalesce, to instill fear and paranoia so that organizing itself becomes an act of radical risk. The system that murdered Fred Hampton is not a relic of history. It is alive, it has adapted, and it is watching. The targets are new, but the playbook is the same. The Black Lives Matter movement, which rose from the streets of Ferguson to challenge the modern-day lynching of Black people by police, is now in the crosshairs. The labels have been updated from Black nationalist hate groups to Black identity extremists, but the intent is identical: to discredit, disrupt, and neutralize. The tools are now more sophisticated. Instead of a single informant like William O'Neill, law enforcement can use social media to create countless fake profiles, infiltrating private group chats, and monitoring organizing efforts from a desk. Instead of a hand-drawn floor plan, they use cell site simulators, known as stingrays, to track the phones of every protester in a crowd, and geofencing to map movements. The surveillance is more pervasive, more technological, and more preemptive. You have seen the man, a 21-year-old leader who fed children and united the poor, a revolutionary who saw that the chains of class were as real as the chains of race. You have seen his crime. It was not violence, it was not hate. His crime was solidarity. He built a rainbow of class consciousness that threatened to burn down the whole rotten structure of American capitalism and white supremacy. You have seen the conspiracy. You have read the government's own words in the Black Messiah memo, the kill order, the policy to find and eliminate any Black leader who could unify the people. You have seen the murder weapon. It was not just a gun. It was a system. The FBI, the Chicago Police Department, the state's attorney's office, and a paid informant all working in concert. You have seen the cover-up. The lies fed to the press, the evidence planted at the scene, the false charges filed against the survivors. A conspiracy to commit murder, followed by a conspiracy to conceal it. You have seen the legacy, a war on Black liberation that did not end on December 4th, 1969. A war that continues today with new tools, new names, but the same unwritten mandate: control Black dissent by any means necessary. They never put the state on trial for the murder of Fred Hampton, so we, the people, must render the verdict. Now you see it. This was never about justice, it was about control.
This is Unwritten Verdict.